Hello, everyone. How are you all? I hope you've been very entertained by Mr. Algie, who I saw before. For those of you who don't know me, I'm primarily a record producer, but I started a very, very, very long time ago as an engineer. So I come more from engineering and mixing than being a musician. So I still, to this day, engineer all my own records and mix them with a lot of help from my friend over there, who's my right-hand man, Atom Greenspan. I thought what I'd talk about today was a combination of engineering and recording bands in particular, and also the dealing with musicians, or rather respecting musicians and getting the most out of them. I find that, you know, as a record producer, when you start out, you have your taste in music, and eventually something happens, you get a lucky break, and you end up producing a particular type of music that you know, connects with people. And I was very, very fortunate that when I started, which was in 1979, I got a lucky break with Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols, and I ended up doing an album by Public Image. So that did well, connected with people. So pretty much from then until now, which is, God knows, how long is that? 30. Who's got a calculator? Anyway, I'm over 90 years old. I know I look really good, but that's partly because I'm a vampire, as these people over here will verify. But I think record producing is can be a bit like being an actor, where you get typecast for a particular type of music. Luckily, I got typecast in the exact area of music that I'm most passionate about, which is essentially rock bands, but it's sort of darker, slightly groove-orientated, gothic, perhaps. So I've worked with a lot of bands. The artist I've worked most with is Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, and I've done about, I think it's 7 records with them. And most recently, I got to work with Black Rebel Motorcycle Club. I don't know, who of you here know them? You've all got bikes, you all wear black. That's good. Well, the Black Rebel Motorcycle album that's just came out, I think it came out 2 weeks ago, actually took me 1 year and 9 months to do, which is the longest album I've ever done. I was probably in the studio for 6 months only. And there was a few vacations that the band had to take for various reasons. But we made a record which I'm very proud of. And I've got one of the sessions here of one of the songs. Hopefully it will play back all right. It's got many, many layers of guitars and keyboards and drums. But essentially, because they are a real band, so a 3-piece band, to me, when they asked me to work with them, I was a huge fan of theirs for a start, and I really liked their first record, which was actually produced, I believe, by Robert's dad, one of the band members' dad. And it was done in a very kind of garagey kind of way. It sonically was, you know, didn't sound expensive, let's put it that way, but it absolutely captured a vibe. And I think if you ask any Black Rebel Motorcycle Club fan, they'll tell you that their first album is their favorite. So I really wanted to try and capture that feeling again. So we picked songs that were more like that. They had lots of songs. Yeah, we went into Sunset Sound Studios, Studio 3, which is where A lot of great bands have worked there, but Prince did a lot of records there. But it's not a huge studio. It's all wood, so the reflection off the walls is very real, and they basically played the songs completely live. A lot of them not done to a click. There's no auto tuning, nothing like that. It's all very real. And then we spent probably 2 weeks recording the most of the backing tracks, and then due to budget reasons, which I find come into play a lot these days, a lot more than when I started making records, we then did a lot of the overdubs at my house, literally in my living room, and at their houses and apartments, and we did it very gradually over a long period. So the album is, I would say, as far as the main bass, the main guitar, main drums, and some of the vocals was all done live, and then all the overdubs were done separately in our houses. And just to give you an idea of budgets, I don't know how many of you are record producers or how long you've been doing it, but when I started making records, and during the 80s, your average budget for an album was around in England, it was about £300,000. So what's that? It's 420, something like that. Now, you're really lucky if you get 70. I mean, that's a decent budget. So, thank God that Pro Tools has come along and it's made it possible for us to record stuff at home for very, very cheap. So that's how I've managed to sustain making the same quality or invention of records that I did back then with, about a quarter, if not less, of the budget. So let me see if this plays back. I can play you some stuff. I've only got 2 hands, so I'm going to have to put this down. So what I'm playing back here is the actual session that that I did at home. It's I basically, again, because of budgets restrictions, whereas I would used to go into a proper recording studio and spend about 3 days to do one mix of one song. That's obviously pretty expensive. Now what I do is I mix it at home in the box and get it as close as I can, and then I take it to a proper studio and split things out, usually in pairs. And this is a very new thing to me because I'm one of these people that stayed with analog tape till as late as I possibly could, and again, that became unaffordable. A lot of things have changed because of budgets. and I've just tried my best to keep the reality, the real music real as much as possible, and trying to keep what to me sounds like an analog sound alive. So basically, I've just combined the two different ways of working, which is Pro Tools and using every plugin I can to get the sound that I want, but then going back into a studio that has a beautiful vintage Neve desk, and I split it up through there, and then I manipulate it further. So that's how I get around things. So this, because I'm playing it back here and we don't have a Neve desk and we don't have the time to set it up, I've actually bought the home mix that I did. So hopefully you can hear what you can do actually at home, which is pretty. It's actually amazed me because when Pro Tools first came out, I really didn't like the sound of it. It didn't really do anything that I couldn't do with all my analog equipment. But now it's gone way beyond that. Now I can do things that I could never do with analog, or maybe if I had a lot of money and a lot of analog equipment, I could do it. But I can play this back, play you some of the sounds. As you can see, there's a vocal comp there, and it's so this is the actual session that I went to mix with. So this isn't set up how I expected. Let's see why. Well, maybe I will talk about other things that might interest you. How about we switch to production? One of the things that I've learned over the years when producing bands and artists, I mostly work with bands, but I've worked with quite a few solo artists, is it's all about a chemistry thing. And I don't know if you're familiar with a record producer called Steve Lillywhite, who produced a lot of my favorite records, and I learned a lot from him. I used to engineer a bit for him. I just found the guy he's a very charismatic, very funny person in the studio. He was also very young when he started, and he did albums for, well, the more famous ones that you would know would be the early U2 records. He also worked with XTC, Susie and the Banshees, and I could go on and on. But he's to me, a fantastic record producer. We had this discussion once, very late at night, probably quite drunk in some club in London, about what is a record producer? What actually does a record producer do, and why do we get hired? What identifies us compared to other record producers? And we came to the conclusion that in the end, it has to do with taste. It has to do with your taste. Obviously, you have to know how to make a record. You have to have the technical ability to navigate through all the equipment. And you have to have skills to deal and understand other people and listen to them. And, you know, musicians very often are not the best communicators. They're very imaginative people. And they kind of, some of the best ones live in their own little world. And you have to kind of get into their world. But ultimately, the reason you get hired instead of another record producer is because they like your taste. And that's what makes you different to everyone else. So usually what happens is the band will hear a record you've done, and they will get in touch with your manager or find you via friends or something, and you'll have a meeting with them. Very often these days it's on Skype, but and I find that what happens is the first thing that let's say gets me the gig will be just whether we can talk and talk about all kinds of things. It can mostly obviously about art and music, and then you build up this connection with them where you understand their world. And the more you understand where they're coming from, you know, they might have grown up out in the countryside, and they might be a very insecure person, but they've built up this persona, you know, that they are kind of pretending to be, to give them confidence to go up on stage and all that, you know, assuming this is a band that's already been gigging and all that. So you have to sort of like really get to know them and find out what makes them tick, because going into the recording studio to record these songs that they've probably lived with for about 6 months is incredibly, you know, they get very nervous about it, and it's very personal, and they're trusting you to change and to alter and to make their songs better. So you need to build up that trust. So I don't know how many of you are wanting to be record producers or are record producers, but my personal experience is that a lot of what gets me the work is just connecting with them as people. And then, you know, it's a case of hearing their songs, and what I find is that when I first hear a song, I have immediate ideas. They're just like, as soon as I hear it, whether it's the intro, the verse, or whatever, and I write down all my ideas. So in the first discussion with them, I'll just go through a few of those ideas and see where their head's at. And it's quite incredible what happens in that first meeting with a songwriter, artist, how they, you know, there's this sense of nervousness as you suggest that maybe their verses are not very good, but their choruses are great, or vice versa. And you go through this kind of crazy, it's like going down a fast river in a way and bashing onto the sides. And I don't know, I always come out of these, the first meetings with bands quite exhausted, because there's a lot of second guessing about what they're trying to tell you about their songs and what they actually want. Anyway, once there's a trust there and they've actually decided, you know, we're going to go in and make the record together, it's a lot of I do quite a lot of homework, go through their songs quite meticulously and think about ideas that I want to present to them. And I usually go into a rehearsal studio for probably more time than you would think with bands, because I really like to pull the songs apart with them, which is very different to me taking their songs and you know, rearranging them in Pro Tools and all that stuff. I like to do it with them, because as you go through the process, like for instance with this band, Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, you know, they're very in their own world. I mean, they're I guess if you know them and you think you know what they're like, you're probably pretty close. They all wear black, they all have motorcycles, they wake up at about 4 p.m., work until late into the night, and you know, they're just in this bubble, which is great, because that's why they have such great character in their music. But their rehearsal studio is really, really tiny and incredibly loud. So if you can imagine being in this just absolute, it's just like noise. The first time I couldn't hear the songs, you know. So anyway, they would start going through the tracks, and would make a big board and went through which songs we thought had the most character, which ones they liked best. and slowly whittled it down to the ones that we wanted to record. And the whole process with them was just this constant, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with these songs, but it had to sit well with them. So it was this constant discussion, a lot of talking, and a lot of what does this mean if we if we have a guitar come in here really loud, what does that do to the feeling of the song? Do we actually want that abrupt change there? And and there's always differences of opinion. So I find that the whole thing of being a record producer with some of these bands is you become a psychologist, and you really get into the sort of, you have to almost go back into their past and work out where they had a bad time with some other record producer or some engineer somewhere, because they're scared of doing things. So you have to kind of be very strong about why you want to change something. You have to be very definite about why you want to alter their music. And I work a lot with, as I mentioned before, with Nick Cave, who's a very funny man, one of the funniest people I've ever worked with. He's also one of the most, some people would say he's probably one of the most arrogant people. I don't know if it's arrogance or just he's incredibly focused. He comes in with a song, and it's mostly written on piano and voice, and he has a very strong idea about what it should be, but he won't necessarily tell you what that is. So you have to sort of go in there and start, there's no demos with him. This is a very different situation with Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. He has 6, sometimes 7 musicians whose taste he likes, and they all live in different parts of the world. We all fly to a studio, and one of the albums, the best albums I've made actually ever, I think, was made in La Fabrique, which is the Mix of the Masters studio in the south of France. And so we all arrived there. I arrived actually 2 days before to set up all the equipment and get all the sounds, because as soon as Nick Cave arrives in any given studio, he wants to play. And he usually won't play a song more than 3 times. So if you haven't captured it within 3 takes, having never heard the song, that song might never see the light of day. So it's a very unusual situation. But going back to talking about how you communicate, how I've found I can communicate best with songwriters and musicians is, we'll start doing a take, and like I said, none of the musicians have heard this, so they're just making things up. And I'll think, well, the song sounds good, it just feels a bit slow, and I'm a bit bored with it, because it's like it's going to not people aren't going to, they're going to think it just feels a bit lazy and all this stuff. So I'll very bravely push the talk back to Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds and say, and Nick will probably get to the end of the song and he'll go, well, Launay, what do you think? And I'll say, well, yeah, it feels a bit slow to me. And he says, you've been listening to too many fucking Hollywood punk bands. And I go, well, no, not really. I just think it's, if it was a bit faster. And he says, are you sure? You sure about this? And the best way I find of talking with Nick Cave is to say, yeah, well, it sounds like you're a bunch of old men. And that does it. That cuts right through to the core of him and the band. Fucking hell, we don't want to be seen as old men. And suddenly they'll play a much more amped version. So anyway, I've done a lot of records with him, so we have a very good chemistry, and it's just this constant joking. And but I found it, you have to be so brave. It's so hard to criticize someone's work. Even if you're criticizing it for good reason and you're being paid to criticize, you have to find a good way of communicating. And there are endless ones with the Bad Seeds where crazy things have happened. You know, I say something that I really believe in, and different thing to the previous take. So then I have to think of some new way of convincing them to go back to the other one and find a middle ground. So it's quite a challenge. And let me think how I can tell you. I've just done another album with an English girl called Anna Calvi. I'm not sure if any of you know of her, but she's an amazing singer. She could sing opera if she chose to. And with solo artists, it's a very different thing because there's much more weight on their shoulders about their music, and it's incredibly personal. They don't have like with a band, they can all lean on each other a bit, and arguments happen within a band, and you end up compromising, and the compromise is ultimately what the band is. So you end up with a direction. With a solo artist, it's just you and them, and you know you're bringing in other musicians that you choose to make that record sound the way it does. With Anna Calvi, the record I made is it's a really bold record, and we got the keyboard player from Portishead plays on it, the drummer from the French band Air, and the bass player from Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. So it's a really imaginative record, and but it took. I did it in England, and we did it in little bits and pieces. But you know, the decision making on this record was absolutely insane. Sometimes we did 8 different versions of the same song, like from scratch, and built them up, and then went back, and the end result was edits of all these different versions using different pieces. So it's the wildest record I've made in a long time. I've made some pretty wild records, I suppose. So, but her music is a little bit like Kate Bush, and I think maybe we could actually bring that one up. I might have more luck than this one. This one's. Oh, okay. Let's see. Yeah, it was just for some reason when I soloed the drums, yeah, there we go. Okay. Well, not sure how this relates to what I've been talking about now, but but he's a drummer. There you go, good drum sound. How many of you are engineers here? 1, 2. Are you interested in tricks? Tricks? You want to hear some tricks? Okay. Well, basically that drum sound is completely real. It's got a few edits, not many. Let me see if I can solo just the real the drum kit, and then I'll show you some tricks that I like to use. So this is just the room mics. With this particular song, because it's kind of a danceable song, we didn't want it to be too crazy live, and it's all slightly gated to make it really push. But one of the things that I find I like to enhance is the low end of kick drums and low end of snare drums, just to give it this sort of thickness. And if I go to the close mics of this drum kit, you'll see what I'm saying, hopefully. On a drum kit, I like Bayer 88, which is I believe Bayer is German. Is it German, Atom? German. He knows everything. Anything I don't know, that man knows. In Europe, if you're an engineer here, you know SM57s, Shores, are like the most normal, standard, cheap microphone. They're worth about $100, and you can put them on anything, and it sounds okay. It sounds really, the very strong mid-range. Well, in Europe, in England, they use Bayer 88s as their standard because they're made closer to England. So I like the Bayer 88. I really like it because it has really very clear top end, and if you EQ the low end of it, it's really strong. So I love these mics. They're very cheap. I think that man over there, how much is a Bayer 88? Is it $300? More or less. So yeah, cheap microphone, and I've used it always on kick drums ever since I started, and I sometimes I usually put it inside the kick drum at an angle, pointing towards the beater, and then sometimes I put another mic outside. That you could, it depends on the actual kick drum and the drummer and all other kinds of things, but sometimes a microphone at a distance, sort of at about a foot from the outside skin, can make it sound just a little bit more real. And if you've got a song that that has enough space to expose that room sound, that comes in handy. And I very often, because I work with bands who tend to record or get their takes relatively quickly, I find it better to put more mics up rather than less. I don't go crazy, but like on kick drums, I usually have two very different sounding microphones on two different parts of the kick drum so that I can manipulate it later. I also do the same with guitar amps. I usually have a dynamic mic. Again, usually a Bayer 88. I tend to use them a lot. And then maybe an AKG 414 condenser mic at a different angle. And I find that if you record two mics on the subject, you can always manipulate it more later, because especially in Pro Tools, you can sample, you can delay one mic against the other using samples, and that is more or less the same as if you're going back in time to the actual time you record it and move the mic. So if you have one mic on a guitar amp, that's it. You can EQ it, you can compress it, you could distort it, but you can't really change the tone that you would have got moving the microphone. If you have two mics, a whole new bunch of possibilities opens up, because you can delay one against the other and it'll change the phase, and phase in recording is a very useful thing to be able to adjust after the fact. And sometimes all the way to the final mix, when I come to the final mix, I'll have the two mics and I'll just adjust them, and you can sort of get all kinds of interesting sounds by delaying them in different parts of the song. So if it's just one guitar in the song, if you change the phase of the microphones between each other, going from the verse to the chorus, it will sound like you've switched in a whole new guitar sound. So I find that very, very useful. So same thing with the kick here. Let's see what this sounds like. So let's just, as you can hear, it doesn't. It's mostly top end, and it's, you know, obviously I've got some EQs on it, and let's see what we got here. Actually, I'll show you this. This is something I like doing, which is on the cheapest of cheapest Pro Tools. You get these EQs. The great thing about these EQs that I like, compared to a lot of the more expensive boutique-y ones, is how narrow this is. It's like a notch filter. And if you find the sweet spot, you can really, you know, you can really get a lot more low end. You can't hear it on these speakers; they don't seem to go down very low. But I very often will find the note that I like. There you go. So now we've got a note there. So I find that very useful, and it's why I continue to use these EQs. I find Fab Filter pretty good for that too. In fact, I think I've probably got a Fab Filter here. Oh, look at that. We haven't paid our bills. Need to get a new mortgage on the house. That's all right. It doesn't matter. Yes! Anyway, as you can see, I've added a lot of mids to this. And I have to put this down. I'm going to put it in my pocket. There we go. Does that work? Yeah. So well, here's a trick. Here's a trick that I like. So I've got, as you can see, this close mic is going to another channel, and on it I've got a Sans amp right there, and then on the Sans amp I've EQ'd some things, some sounds I liked. If I switch this on, you'll hopefully hear a lot more low end come in, and I find Sans amps or any kind of distortion added to low end, just, you know, you can go crazy with it. As you can see, suddenly you've got so much more low end. So even though this is a real drum kit, you know, yes, there are some edits, as you can see. Those edits are mostly done, not necessarily correcting her timing, is because I like the feeling of the groove more. But so let's see if I can do this. Hang on. So like, you can hear the kick drum. If I take away the Sans amp now, you'll see the difference. So it's sort of a way of enhancing something that's acoustic and real, without it, you know, without sort of going through it meticulously and adding a kick drum to every, you know, using a sample. So there's no samples on this at all. This is a real drum kit. And I have another trick on the snare that's a similar kind of idea. Basically the same kind of thing, where that's just natural, and it's, you know, it's not a very live sounding snare because we wanted that dead 70s kind of thing. But what I found is that very often the leak that you get from the hi-hat, just because this hi-hat's close to the snare, is if you start gating it much, it sounds are natural. So I keep the main snare ungated. As you can see, it's just natural. It's just got a very simple EQ sound, which is being sent to where it says snare compressed. And that's gated. I'll show you. If we listen to that, you know, it's just all basically thud and low end. And I find, you know, putting the two together means that the top end doesn't sound gated, and that's what your ear hears is you know, sometimes you hear these mixes of drums where you can hear the gates going, you know, and it's not, I don't like it so much. So when you put it all together, so then if we add our room mics back, so that's just like, I guess it's two very simple tricks that you can do on a very, very cheap Pro Tools rig without any boutique. You can also, if you know what that means, which is a very narrow bandwidth on the EQ, you can sweep it until you find the sweet spot of the note of the snare and the note of the kick. And obviously, you know, it might vary from beginning of a take to the end, but you usually can find a really nice place. Let me see. Let me play a bit more of this song. How much longer have I got? Am I allowed to? How much longer am I allowed to make a fool of myself up here? 10? Ooh. Can we put up the other song quickly? Oh. Do you have any questions? Does anybody know any of the records I make? Do you love me? Let's put it's As a Man Consolidated. This, that one. Hopefully it'll open. Do any of you have any questions I could answer? No. Atom has one.
Yes. So I really liked the sound of your room mics. Do you have any tricks of like where you like to put your room mics? And did I see that you used an SM7 for your room mic?
I do like recording the room. When I choose a studio to record a band in particular, I like to find studios that have a really good sounding room, and it could be all wood, preferably like a wooden floor. I have recorded in a lot of studios around the world. One of my favorite studios, which doesn't exist anymore, where I started, was the Townhouse in London, which, if you know that Phil Collins record with the that one. So I was an assistant engineer on that, and the engineer was Hugh Padgham, and so I learnt how to get that drum sound. Yeah, it's just so the walls of the recording, the drum room, were all stone. They're all stone, and it's a very abrasive sounding room, and you know, that drum sound is a very simple sound to get. And hopefully, if this opens, I'm going to play you a track off the Anna Calvi record, and she wanted the drum sound from the Public Image record I did, which is a very bold move because that drum sound you can't record any cymbals or hi-hats. It's so compressed, and the room is so amped up that if you hit a hi-hat or a cymbal, it'll just cut your ears off. It's very abrasive. So I'll play you that now, and you can get this drum sound in any live sounding room as long as it's not too big, because the trick about getting a big drum sound, in my opinion, is to get the reflection off of the walls. So if you're in a room that's massive, the delay off the walls is so long that the drummer sounds out of time if you put those mics really loud in your mix, which is what you want to do. So all I use to get this drum sound, which you'll hopefully hear in a minute, is two 87s, two Neumann 87s, going through two Uri 1176s. And the 1176s are slammed. If you're recording on an SSL desk, actually the compressors on there will do it really well too, because they're very cheap and nasty, so they attack very well. And honestly, that is that drum sound. It's just two mics, and then I have another one on the kick for definition, because the kick tends to get lost in the mix because it's lower and lower in frequency. So you can. I'll play. Hopefully, this will play back, and I can play you what I'm talking about. There's two drum kits on it. Okay. I'm gonna do this at home at work. I don't know why. Just set up with
let me do solo safe with all this. Yeah, that should be good.
we got two drum kits there.
Yeah, using the solo safe any of the lessons.
So you can hear this drum sound is pretty powerful. This has got no samples, no triggers, no nothing. I'll just go to where the drummer starts really kicking in. Come on. Don't you hate Pro Tools? When you're at a convention. See, drum sound is too big to be played back. Told you, it's just too big. Hang on, we can mute all the other stuff. All the other instruments don't matter, right? You don't care about guitars and keyboards, and we only care about drums. Shall I mute a few things? The sessions are very big. I have to apologize. I've got way too much imagination. I work with people with way too much imagination, and This guy knows what he's doing. He should be up here talking, really. But anyway, so this drum sound, it is gated, as you can hear, but it's very simple. It's just got the gates on the ambient mics, the room mics, which is 287s, like I said. So if this guy did do the drum fill that Phil Collins did, it would probably sound pretty similar. So actually, hang on a minute. I think there is one. Here it comes. How about, shall I just... How about like if I solo, you know, I've got obviously all the mics on, but if I just solo the room mics, you will see. Let's see now. So that's just 3 microphones. And they're just very compressed, very, very compressed. And in fact, I've compressed them even further using the wonderful Sound Toys Devil Lock, which is one of my favorite plugins. But even if you take those off, I'll take them off and the gate off, and so you can see what the room sounds like. So that's just with the original EQ from the Neve desk and Yuri's. So it's really about 2 things, 3 things: a really good drum kit, really good drummer, like that guy over there, and then it's just the room. The room has to be relatively small. By small, I mean probably from that wall to that post square. Any bigger than that, and you won't be able to get that drum sound. It will just sound like reverb, and then it's kind of a normal drum sound. So my time is probably up, right? Has anybody got 1 or 2 really interesting questions? Hello, young lady who I've never met before.
Never seen you before in my life. So you were talking about getting to know the musicians. What happens when they're like, there's one word at 2 minutes 45, and I don't know what's wrong with it, but I have to fix it? Where do
You mean lyrically? No.
sound-wise, like something that's like an impossible fix, but you've got to be...
I'll tell you, with singing, getting a good vocal performance, it's all about confidence. And there's probably nothing worse for anybody, no matter how good a singer you think they are or how famous they are, and you know that they're a great singer. I've worked with some incredible singers, and some of them are very, very famous and known for being great singers. When they are in front of a microphone and they hear their voice back, it's like if any of you have heard your own voice, it's a horrible thing. I mean, when I watch this back, I'm supposed to be here tomorrow. I might not come back if I see what how my voice sounds today. But so it's all about encouragement and telling them and actually sometimes distraction. Sometimes I find that if you if they're nervous about, well, I'll think of a story like this. This has happened very often, where the singer will come in and they'll say, oh, you know, and they'll be making cups of tea. They'll have a cold suddenly out of nowhere. They've got a cold. I can feel the flu coming on. I'm not sure my voice is very good today. All that stuff comes out. And you just go, it's okay, we're not doing the vocal today. Can you just do some guide vocals? We just need some guide vocals, just so that we know where the vocals fall. And suddenly their cold goes. They go out there and they go, you're just doing guide vocals, right? I said, yeah, you know, is this reverb in your headphones, is it all right? And they said, well, yeah, it's all right. We're just doing guide vocals, it's all right. They do it, and it's the vocal, because they're not worried. They're not overthinking it. They're not self-conscious. And whereas if you do the opposite of like, oh, let's set up. I mean, this honestly, I really mean this. Probably one of the worst things you can do for a singer to get their vocal is to set up the studio in this way that's got all the gobos, screens around them, and everything is so prepared, and it's just you and them, and suddenly they're like, oh my God, you know, it's like having a spotlight on them, and they're doing the vocal for the song that they've been living with for 6 months. This is the last opportunity to do it. They're going to fuck it up because the nerves will kick in and they won't do a good performance. You're much better off just going, hey, just go and sit over there on the couch and grab that microphone and just do a guide vocal. I mean, I shouldn't really be saying this because now the trick's out. All these singers are going to know that. But it is true. There's a lot of it is psychological, even with the best singers. This girl, Anna Calvi, hopefully you'll hear her record, is one of the best singers I've ever worked with. And so nervous about doing vocals. And yet, and most of the vocals that she did during the backing tracks were the ones. They were the ones. With Nick Cave, pretty much, I would say more than 50% of all the vocals on the Nick Cave records I've done are the vocals from the recording of the backing track, because he's not thinking about it. He's more concerned about whether he's got the chords right, because he's, you know, the song's just been written. And those are the vocals that have all the character and all the charisma, because they're sort of experimenting and they're, you know, doing all these interesting sort of tonal changes and characters. It's all about character. So I find that a lot of, from a record producer's perspective, I find a lot of the way I get my records made is by really relaxing, doing whatever I can to make the artist feel super comfortable and having fun. It's a really important thing to me. I've often said to bands that I won't work with them unless it's going to be fun for me and them. And on that note, over to the funniest man I know,
Thanks,
Victor.
Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, everybody. I should have worn this.
You should have.
Can we do it again?
Yes.
Can I wear this one tomorrow?
Take two.
All right.
So you can join us again tomorrow at 2 p.m. for more fun times with Nick Launay.
Yes.
And again, go check out the platform, the website. Nick has got amazing videos there. Going inside the track, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, explaining the way he produced the record, mixed it. It's pretty amazing. Thanks for joining us. New faces just got there. Some people want to see Greg Wells do his magic. If you're unfamiliar with the Mix with the Masters program at this stage, just a quick reminder that what we're trying to do is share knowledge among you guys, mixer, producers, engineers, and invite Grammy Award-winning producers, mixers, recording engineers to share their techniques, philosophies, approaches in many different ways. We started out in 2010 doing week-long seminars in the south of France in a big mansion. There's a recording studio there, and the concept we came up with was to invite a mixer, an engineer, a producer to work and share his techniques with other professionals who are coming from all around the world for this. 15 attendees, learning from one, reading with maybe more 30 different producers, guest producers, including the amazing Greg Wells, who will be joining us in 30 seconds. If you're interested in those sessions, please go online, MWTM.eu. You'll find more information about all our seminars, our schedule this year. It's a pretty amazing time. You could apply there. Just submit a little bit about your work, what you do, and we'll get back to you. We'll get the ball rolling and we'll talk about it. Greg Wells will be doing a songwriting, production, recording, mixing seminar in March this year, from the 18th till the 24th. We've done a couple of seminars with Greg last year and the year before. Those are really specific and really special. It's the only format we do in such a way where we welcome an artist, a songwriter, and create a song from scratch with you guys, and explaining everything step by step. This year is going to be especially amazing, and Greg will tell you about it in a minute. If you don't have the chance to join us in France this year or next year, I would strongly recommend to check out what we do online with Greg, but also with Launay and all the presenters we had so far, and some of them are not here because of the Grammys. Good timing. It's a yearly membership. You go online, you subscribe, you access exclusive and amazing catalog of videos and tutorials with all those Grammy Award-winning producers, engineers, and mixers. It's shot at their studio in New York, LA, Nashville, London, Paris, and all those guys are just sharing all their techniques with you guys. You're sitting in your living room, in a plane, in a bus, using our app or the website, watching all those guys explaining decades of experience and the way they do things. So if you're not a member yet and you're interested in learning more about their approaches, during NAMM we're doing two things. We're giving coupons, promo codes, in order to get 3 months for free out of a year. You just need to use the code NAMM 2018. It's pretty simple to remember. NAMM 2018 and NAMM 2018 when you register before tomorrow night, and you'll be able to get a discount to become a member of this platform. And what we'll do as well is we're doing a raffle. So for you guys who are attending those panels, we'll be giving away a yearly membership. In order to enter the raffle, you just need to have your badge scan. So we'll be going around and scan your badges. Chloe's around. Max will do it as well. I can scan your badge. And basically, next week, we'll announce the winners, and you'll get a yearly membership, and you'll be able to access all the videos we have online for a year. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be welcoming someone very special to us, an amazing producer. We're really honored to have him part of our program and to work with him both in France and online through our tutorials. Please give an amazing round of applause to Mr. Greg Wells.
Hi. Welcome to the optimum listening environment that is the NAMM show. So what I'm going to talk about today is I got asked to work on a film, which I've never done before. And I've actually kind of really shied away from that world because I was scared of the lack of control that you have. I know that film studios, they often take over, kind of wreck the music and I really want to. I'm a control freak, so I want the music to sound the way I want it to sound. So back in June, I started work on this project. I'm not a Broadway musical guy. It's never really spoken to me. It's not my vibe. But it's a movie that's a musical, and it's set in the 1850s, and it's about the guy that founded the modern circus. His name's P.T. Barnum. And, the truth of his story is pretty eyebrow-raising. He was a really conflicted guy, and, not exactly like a role model. But in his 60s, he started what became the circus. He sort of invented show business. And Hugh Jackman, it's his project, it's his baby, and he literally told 20th Century Fox, I'll give you another Wolverine movie if you let me make this musical about P.T. Barnum. And thankfully, Logan was a real success. They made hundreds of millions of dollars of it. So they're like, okay, you can do your song and dance movie, Hugh. And so they did, and I got brought in to work on it, and I really liked the songs, and it was like on the right side of sort of cheesy a little bit, but it wasn't like cringy at all. And I thought the songwriting was amazing. And so I got way into it, and I spent 6 months working on it. The thing came out just before Christmas, and the movie opened, and it didn't open that well. It had sort of a not great first weekend. It got obliterated by Star Wars and Jumanji and whatever else was happening. And then the next weekend, it did 3 times as well as it did on the opening weekend. And everyone was like, what just happened? And then it did even better. And now it's grossed $250 million, and it's still just going and going and going. And the soundtrack album, which I produced and mixed, I, in my ignorance, thought this is probably not really going to see the light of day. It's been the #1 album in America for the last 3 weeks. Not the #1 soundtrack album, the #1 album on the album sales charts, and still is right now. So what do I know? It's sort of like validation of chasing something that feels right. And I can never second guess what the marketplace is going to think, whether they're going to react to it or they're going to go, what is that? I was really ready for what is that. But so I brought one of the songs with me that I mixed in my studio and produced. I'm playing a bunch of stuff on it as well. And it's how the movie opens. So I'm going to play that for you. We can get into like sort of the technicalities of what I did to make it sound like this. My job was to make it feel like your collar was just being constantly pulled from beginning to end, which is really hard to do because I'm a fan of tension and release. I think that art is tension and release. When you get the tension right and then you have a release, then you need the tension again. It's like a pendulum swing, We're wired that way. On, off, night, day, But this was all tension, and the only release was the last chord of the song. So I'll play it for you, and if you have any questions, and we can get into the technical things, and then we could just do Q&A. I think we're kind of queued up here. This is called The Greatest Show. It's how the movie opens.
Fight it, it's coming for you, running at you. It's should feel the feeling taking over. It's fire, it's freedom, it's flooding open. It's a picture in the pulpit and your blind devotion. There's something breaking at the brick of every wall. It's holding all that you know. So tell me, do you want to go where it's covered in all colored lights, where the runaways are running the night? Impossible comes true. It's taking over you. We light it up, we won't come down, and the sun can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. Colossal, we come these renegades in the ring. Where the lost get found, every crown of the circus king. Don't fight it, it's coming for you, running at you. It's only this moment, don't care what comes after. It's blinding out, shining anything that you know. Just surrender, 'cause you're coming and you want it. Where the runaways are running the night. Impossible goes through. Intoxicating you. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. It's everything you ever want. It's everything that's here right in front. This is where you wanna be. It's everything. This is the greatest show. It's coming in all the color lights. Where the runaways are running the night. Impossible comes true. It's taking over you. This is the greatest show. We light it up, we won't come down, and the walls can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. 'Cause everything you want is right in front of you, and you see the impossible is coming true, and the walls can't stop us now. Yeah.
It's so intense. It's like, from beginning to end. So thanks for coming. Good night. What should I talk about? Should I get into like how it sounds, the way it sounds? Should I take questions now? Should I kind of looking at a oil painting? Yes. We need to get a microphone over there. Can we? All the way over. As far as possible. This was the first time I ever mixed anything in the box, because I had to. I always use analog gear in the mixing, and I couldn't because the movie studios were working at a different pace. I had to make stems constantly, because they do preview, they're testing the movie as they make it. They'll put together, you know, like a roughly edited version of it, and they need stems for me. And it would just take forever to, first of all, I couldn't work in my control room if we were using the analog gear making stems. So I buy me a second Pro Tools rig. I put it up in the studio lounge. My engineer was able to bounce offline stems, saving time, and I could keep working in the control room. But I had to invent a new way of mixing for myself, which we can get into. It's all here in front of us. Yes, go ahead.
So it sounds absolutely incredible. I saw the movie. The movie's awesome.
Oh,
When you
cool.
were doing the vocals, like, was the entire cast there, everybody singing at one time? Because the gang vocals are insane. Harmonies are insane. Everything's insane. What was isolated and what was everybody singing together?
It was very piecemeal. It was very like one thing at a time. And everything took forever. Like forever. But it's nice that you point that out. Those are I've many times I've got to work with like a real gospel choir in the studio, like Andre Crouch, who's passed away now, but like his gospel choir, or like, you know, versions of his choir, like the choir that sang on Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror. I've got to make records with that group of singers, and they're all stunning and amazing, and like it doesn't really get better. I've got to say though, these vocals which were done in New York are the best kind of choir. It's so intense, it's so insane, and I wasn't there for those sessions. I hadn't been hired yet, so I wasn't on the project. But they've all said we were basically just screaming in pitch, you know, like shouting, hollering in pitch, and that's how you get that sound. And they pushed and they pushed and they pushed, and those weren't short sessions either. But yeah, it's really like put the fader up, and to hear that, it kind of, it meant that for me, it meant the rest of the track had to hit that where that bar was, because it was so phenomenal. And I'm a real freak for like energy, trying to get energy to come through the speakers, because the speakers basically they're dead. You know, they don't care what we play through them. But I also, and I didn't bring the visual clip. Working on this project for me was so interesting because I had a finished movie to watch that's all synced up to the track. I didn't bring it here because it would have made the file too huge, and I didn't want to have the transfer take 3 days. But I was working a picture. It was a rough edit, and they changed some stuff, and there were like little things written. I could see the time code and whatever. I could still see the actors and the most of the edits and the performances, and that changed how I mixed it so much. I noticed that if I stopped working to picture, the music would start to change and sound more like a record. When I put the picture back up, it went to this other sort of heightened, very hyper sort of place that maybe would feel too over the top for me if I was just making a record, but to picture, it just felt right. So that was an interesting lesson too. And then once that penny dropped and I realized the music was getting better because I was working a picture, I always worked a picture. I always kept saying, let's put the picture up, put it up. If somebody closed it, because sometimes it's in the way, I would ask I'd just do it, or I'd ask my engineer to, because it makes it all sound different. And then the director came in after I'd worked for a few weeks, and he said, you're making the visuals look different. Well, I didn't know what he meant. But he said, I'm telling you, it looks like a different movie now. And I said, all I'm trying to do is get the music to match what the visuals are doing. And he said, you're actually altering the way that the visuals are hitting him. And he'd filmed the thing. You know, he's a visual guy. But thank you very much. We worked really hard on this, and I really honestly was prepared for people to just sort of miss it, you know, because it's kind of a kooky thing. But I think the fact that it is so nuts and that it's a musical, and that, you know, like, for instance, the song that we just won a Golden Globe for Best Song in a Film. And it's sung by Keala Settle, who in the movie plays the bearded lady. And she's one of the best singers I've ever heard. So much so that I actually wrote to the director and I said, who is that? Because I was working on this song. It's called This Is Me, which is an homage and a tribute to, you know, anyone that's ever felt like an outcast, like a freak, like you don't fit in. That's what the theme of the movie is. That's what I love most about it. That's why I got hooked from the very beginning, because we all feel that way for our own reasons, you know. And it's a celebration of the fact that we are all different from each other, which I'm all about, you know, especially in the current political age of bullshit that we're dealing with. So yeah, I was like a fish hook in my face. I'm in. And it's sung by a 42-year-old woman, you know, who doesn't look like Camila Cabello, you know, at all. And she's going to sing that on the Oscars. It got nominated for Best Song in a Film in the Oscars, and she's going to perform it live. And I mean, it's just, I'm not answering your question anymore, but sorry. Anyway, thank you for your question, which I hope I answered.
Greg, could you just talk a little bit about how to keep the intensity of the choir along with the intensity of everything else that's around? Because in one of my sessions right now, I have a choir that sounds great by itself, and there's energy, but when you try to keep the intensity of both of those things together, how do you address that?
That's an excellent question. parallel compression helped me a lot. So kind of get the sound of the choir where it sounds great by itself. The miracle of parallel compression. By the way, I didn't really know what parallel compression was until a couple years ago. Does anyone not know what I'm talking about? And that would have been me 2 years ago. Do you want me to explain what it is? Okay, that's all I need is one hand. Parallel compression is you just take, it sounds like a scary word. It sounds like what I can never understand what that means, but it's easy. It's compressors. All they do is control volume. That's it. It's all this stuff does. EQ, all of it. It's just volume control. So I would get the choir sounding how I want it, and then using an aux send that to another stereo aux send and put a compressor on it. And the compressor is pretty active, pretty fast attack, pretty quick release, lots of compression. And then I would take it out of solo, right? So I'm listening to the whole track, which is what you're battling with, right? And start turning up the output of the compressor, blending it in with what's already there. That's what it is. You're blending in a very compressed version of the original source to make it just sort of do this in the mix. It just leans forward a bit more. And there's such energy, there's such like electricity, and I love that. You know, when I hear those singers sing, I feel like my fingers are being stuck in an electrical outlet. You know, it's just like, I don't want to like have everybody feel that kind of thing. And it's so easy to get it wrong. You know, it's so easy to feel like, oh, it's too much. And actually, I said this yesterday. When I was talking about this here. When I first met with the songwriters, I was trying to, I don't know, sound like I know what I'm talking about or knew what I was talking about on the day. And I said, I find often like less is actually more. Less is more. And they laughed, and one of them said, on this project, we've been on it for 4 years, we've come to the conclusion that more is more. And that's kind of the only way we get through it, So just gobs of stuff, tons of compression, tons of EQ, tons of teeth, not being safe at all. Adding distortion, that's a big one. Whatever works, the choir in the beginning, that thing. When I first heard it, I thought it'd be really cool to make that sound like the old Mutt Lange Def Leppard records. Pyromania, Pour Some Sugar on Me. And I would always read that, and Mutt doesn't really do interviews. He never does stuff like this. He just stays kind of off the radar because he's smarter than all of us. But actually, I'd love him to do this. I'd love to hear him just go to spew, and I want to ask him a lot of questions. But he would send the vocals through a Marshall amplifier, and then roll out all the bottom end and blend that in. And by the way, there's 80 tracks of vocals, and it's way excessive, but that's how you get that sound. So I wanted it to have that vibe, and I sort of did my own version of that. Distortion's really your friend with mixing. Not that everything should sound like it's going through a distortion pedal, but there's different levels of distortion. Overdrive, all of that. Harmonic distortion. It's amazing on vocals, it's amazing on bass, it's awesome on drums. Sometimes I'll distort the entire mix a little bit, It's really hard to make this stuff sound like a live performance, and I'm a pastor's son, so I grew up in church, and that's my biggest influence, It's like, I wound up playing church organ at the age of 12 all through my teens, and but that's my perspective. That's why I'll never mix a tom hard left or hard right, because I still view it like it's at the front of the church playing. And I want it to feel like a great performance. I want it to feel like a live performance. And so I'm especially something like a choir like this, whatever sweat was coming off them and their neck muscles are all. I want all of us to feel that. And we'll jump through many hoops to try and have that speak through these merciless speakers who could really give a shit what we're playing through them. They don't care, It's hard. But just experiment. Compression can be your friend too, especially parallel compression. And you can do different versions of it too. You could do a parallel compression with the choir where it's like super distorted, like a Mutt Lange thing. do a parallel version of the choir where it's like the Dolby A card reverse tricked, or oral exciter, something that's real like real high, really high. Maybe DS that a little bit, blend that in, see what that does in the mix. Sure.
So I noticed a bunch of sub bass going on in the mix. How do you control that and get it to sound so precise?
It's really hard. Bass is the thing I find the hardest, because I always want to have too much of it in the track. I'm always overdoing it. I don't know. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. I don't think I'm good at it. I want to hear it, and I wind up with too much in there. So I have a playlist. I talk a lot about having a mixed reality playlist, and I'll go to that on Spotify or iTunes, and I'll check in, and I'm often surprised at how, I'll go to like the bass heavy tracks on that playlist, and I'll be surprised at like, where's the bass? But it's because I brainwash myself into thinking that my insane bass level is correct, and it's often not. So I have to reel it in. There is actually on the mix bus on this one, I'm pretty sure if I turn around, I'm going to see a subharmonic synthesizer on the mix bus. Let's find out. Yep. There it is. That's on the entire mix. And, I'm only using 21%, and I bet I've automated it to come up and down in different spots. Let's see. Maybe I didn't, but maybe I did. Yeah, it looks like I have. Is that really reality? So I've done a ton of automation with it. It looks like it's coming up in the choruses, and then for the outro it just goes bananas, and then kind of comes back. It's still quite loud, but I'm only running it. What was it? 20 something. What's the highest point? The highest mix level is 50%. I really love this plugin. It's beautiful. It gives you a lot of control. I like all the subharmonic synthesizer plugins. Like Low Ender is really good. It's a little tiny boutique plugin that Chad Blake uses a lot. Anything that Chad Blake does, I immediately copy. Low Air by Waves is great. This one's really cool. You can really get in and really tweak it. There's different ranges of the low end that it brings up. You can go nuts with it. But also knowing that it was a movie and in a good theater, like there's a lot of subs. Sub is like a different thing, and actually a real kind of eye-opening lesson for me was talking to the film mixer. Like those are my mixes in the movie, but they got changed a lot because I had to hand it over to the film mixer who's mixing on a console that's as long as like from here to the end of this room. You need a golf cart, to get back and forth. And he's like, Greg, when the screen is that big, you really do want the bottom end to go much lower than you would on a record. Like you want more of it. You want to feel this real visceral, physical rumble and this depth. And I thought, that's mumbo. That's like, I'm not sure I believe you. But then as soon as I got onto the mixing stage with him at 20th Century Fox, and it's you mix these things in an actual theater, not a small theater. It's a big theater. They've taken out all the seats, and the last sort of quarter of the theater, last 25%, is the mixing board, and some chairs behind some couches for executives to sit in. And I immediately got it. It's a more immersive experience. It's a bigger thing. So this is probably more than I would do on an album that would just live as a stereo mix, or maybe not. It depends what the project is. But low end is a tough one for me, but I definitely, in this thing, I just wanted everything to feel like a herd of elephants running towards me almost at all times. And there's a moment at the top of the second verse where I pitched an 808 to, like Digital Underground's The Humpty Dance, like that bass line, which is one of the best bass lines ever. I wanted it to sound like that. And I needed that subharmonic synthesizer to do it. And it's really easy to overcook, and you got to have monitors that are telling you the truth. And after years of trying different speakers and subs and no subs and 2 subs, and I have settled on these PMC monitors that cost a boatload of money. But I never have to check mixes anywhere else now. You know, I don't have to do the car check anymore. I can make creative changes, but
Foremost, you're really good at this, so thank you for embracing humility. I think everybody's really benefiting from this. But you spoke a little bit about getting stems of vocals, and you being brought into the project, so you weren't part of that part of the project. Part of what sets your records apart, they always sound great, but your arrangement skills are second to none. You do a good job at looking after the song. Did you get a chance to change any of those charts as a player, being influenced in the process, or was that just, here's the charts, here's the vocals, you're building a track to this?
it was a crazy project. Did I already explain how it came to me? And well,
you had mentioned that that they had just contacted you, but
oh, I see.
But not where the process began.
So they'd been making it for 4 years, and I just came in for the last half year of it. And they started with the songwriters' demos, which were great demos. Quite often, what I did was try to. Other producers were hired, really talented pop producers, just all kinds of different people. But a lot of these people, even though they're really great at doing a thing or the thing that they do, if you say play an A minor chord, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to be like, what? And I kind of like that. There's like I have perfect pitch on a good day, and I know too much. That's it. And I now know too much about that stuff, and I had to try very hard to forget it, because I think it helps solve problems, but I don't think it helps the inspiration show up. In fact, if anything, it can get in the way of that happening. So anyway, they needed someone who was a bit more of a musician-y producer to come in and be able to pivot and make changes and deal with edits in the film that would then mean a different transition musically, or change the tempo, or change the key, change nothing if it was right, So I was given tracks like this one where the actors shot the movie to the demo, and they recorded the actors' vocals. So I didn't do much recording of vocals. It was pretty much all done by the time it got to me. I would say it was 92% done. I did a bit with Hugh, and a couple of Zendaya came to my studio one night and fixed a few lines, but it was mostly done. And then there was the demo, so that was like the first, 20 tracks. And then there'd be producer number 1 that had been hired, and there was all that person's tracks. Producer number 2 that had been hired, there was all their tracks. Sometimes producer number 3 and all their tracks. Orchestral session number 1 done in New York with this arranger. Orchestral session number 2 done in Los Angeles with a different arranger. Every once in a while, orchestral session number 3, horn session number 1, horn session number 2. It was chaos. And the average track count was around 400 tracks, and sometimes went north of that too. So it was sort of monumental, and I had to really get to a place where I wasn't intimidated by it, and I was really scared actually in the beginning, especially looking at this beautiful visual. If you see the movie, it's a really sumptuous, he was trying to do Technicolor, like a modern version of Technicolor, so it looks overly saturated in a really tasteful way. It's beautiful. And that's what I was looking at, and it looks really expensive, and it was expensive. I'm thinking, how do I? And the director said, you are welcome to use all of it, none of it, whatever you want, which was even more terrifying, really, in a way. But so sometimes I wouldn't touch it if I thought it was perfect. I'd just take more of a mixing approach. And then a lot of it, though, was kind of problematic, and I had to really dive into the garden and get neck deep in the soil and just, we got that rutabaga, it's got to go there, a lot of that. It was the most intense thing I've ever worked on. Really hard work. Thankfully, the songwriters and I, who were really the ones in the pit doing all the work, we got along really well. I really love them. I would say we're friends now, at the end of it, which is nice. But it was hard. It was heavy lifting, and they're very forensic. They're very detailed. No, not one little pebble goes unturned. They're looking under everything, and they remember everything from like a demo from 5 years ago or 2 years ago, and they have folders within folders and folders and subfolders, and they have it all on their laptops, and no one's on their phone doing Snapchat or Facebook. They're just super high functioning dudes, and making me look like a drunk driver, really. So, and it was a lot of their input. And then the incredibly talented Alex Lackamore, who is Lin-Manuel Miranda's right-hand musical guy who did all the music for Hamilton, he came into the project as the executive music producer about a month before I got hired. So he was there too, and he's really detail-oriented, almost more than the songwriters. Nothing escapes him, he's just like... They all kind of had like a Mutt Lange brain, actually, to reference this producer, Mutt Lange, who will literally take 3 weeks to find the right level of a kick drum in a track. 3 weeks. Like moving the fader. I haven't found it. It's not right. 3 weeks later, I got it. Which is easy to make fun of and laugh at, but my God, like his Mutt Lange's track record is undeniable. Like whatever it is that he worked on, it all sounds incredible, and that's how he arrived there. It's sort of irrefutable. Sorry, I'm really Captain Tangent. It's a wind up answering like questions that were never asked. But I could get the sickle out and just go through and chop stuff and lose it. Some of these songs I got rid of almost all the tracks and built it again. Some of these songs I used what was there. I take out a little bit. One song called Rewrite the Stars that's actually turning into a hit song right now. There was an orchestral version done of it, and a bunch of other versions done, and then there was the original demo, which sort of sounded like kind of Euro pop and didn't really fit the film, and I was given the task of fixing that one. And just as sort of a experiment, I thought I'm just going to let the Euro pop version play with the orchestral version. Like, they're diametrically opposed to each other. And it sounded immediately like it was all the same track. And I just thought, that works really well. I wonder what they're going to think. The songwriters had to go to New York for a couple of days, and so I just mixed that. I didn't add or do anything, really. Or maybe I added a little bit, and they came back and they were like, that's it. And that's choices like that. It's weird. It's weird to be in such a position of like, tear that building down, or make it 10 times higher, or do nothing. It's right. It's fun. Once I got comfortable with it, it was fun to swim in those waters. Doing a lot of talking. Any other questions? Do anyone want to ask about the mixing? Go ahead.
Yeah,
I didn't see they had the mic, sorry.
I was actually going to ask if you felt like going through one or more of...
Kind of given vocal chain, I don't think, but let's look at it. Okay, so here's Hugh Jackman's lead vocal.
And all was is left behind. Don't fight it, it's coming for you, running at you. It's only this moment, don't care what comes after. Your fever dream, can't you see, getting closer.
So I remember when I got this vocal, it was recorded very uncompressed, which is also another movie thing which drives me bananas because I want to hear everything sounding like a finished record from the very beginning. And it was crazy dynamic, like ridiculously dynamic. And I'm trying to make it have the urgency of a more of like a pop record. So I bought this compressor made by Chandler called the RS-124. It's based on an old Abbey Road glorious holy grail piece of gear. And ran the vocal through that and just crushed the crap out of it. And it's made everything feel really like that, And I thought, that works, and that's really helping me. So then I printed that, and that's what we're hearing here. And I think I ran it through a couple other things, analog gear. And when I did that, I didn't really need to put any plugins directly on that track. So there's nothing on it. I'm just sending it to a doubler. And it looks like that doubler is a little bit automated. There's a little less of it in the beginning. But then I'm mixing this whole record, actually, on multiple mix buses. So the lead vocal gets sent to bus A, which is here. So any lead vocal, Zac Efron takes over the lead vocal at the end. There's a bunch of ad-libs. I can't remember where I sent them, but anyway. Here's what I got on the lead vocal bus. A little bit of that. It should hardly be doing anything, but it's just grabbing some of the top kind of peaks. Beautiful, beautiful compressor. And a little bit of this gorgeous EQ. Just, sometimes, typically, on an EQP 1A, like a Pultec EQ, people would crank 12K, 16K, 10K. I sometimes really love what happens when you turn up 5K and have it set sort of like that. More of a broader bandwidth. And just a little bit of 100 hertz on the bottom does this thing to fatten the vocals out. And then the vocals were a little bit noisy, so I have a little gate on them. They were a bit hissy. And then all of that, this is the lead vocal bus here. This is drums, bus B. Tons of stuff on that. We can get into that. But anyway, all of that then gets sent. And there's other parallel compression going on here. There's some distortion here that comes in and out. And then I bring all of it. This mix just has gobs of processing on the final stage of the mix bus. It all gets sent in here. And I have 2 crazy compressors on here too. This is 3 parallel compressors. Very cool MWTM plugin. And then it's doing a tiny little bit of multiband limiting here, just a little bit. And I pull that level down because if I don't, the compression on the 3369 is way too grabby. Even if I set the threshold at the most open, less compression-y setting, it's still too much. So I have to pull the level down. And then the mix goes through that at a mix of whatever the mix is set to, not very much, just for a little bit more rage and general caffeine. And then right behind us is the company that makes this thing in analog, but this plugin is amazing. Black box. And I'm adding a little saturation on the low end. So the vocals are going through all of this stuff. Everything's going through it. Then I got that going on. I'm playing with the stereo width. Probably in the choruses it gets wider. It might open up in the choruses and shut down a bit in the verses. A little bit of this. Look at that. Like hardly anything going on, but it does a thing. When I have a lot of stuff on, anything, whether it's the mix bus or an individual element, if it's a lot of plugins, it's usually a lot of things doing just a tiny little bit. Each thing is doing just a bit of stuff. And it's usually something that another piece of gear couldn't do if you turned it up more. So it's like this sort of potpourri, gumbo-y thing. That we already looked at, and I love this plugin. Again, Chad Blake turned me on to it. It's a tape machine. It's really flexible. You can make it sound like a cassette. You can make it sound like all kinds of different tape machines at 15 IPS, 30 IPS. You can play with all this stuff and really get in and tweak it. It sounds fantastic. And again, there was another gate because there was sort of hiss all over the place on this one. And I'm revealing all my mix bus secrets. We got a little bit of multi-band compression here, not much. That's some EQ, scooping out a bit of 300E something. Boosting a little bit here, around 50. Losing some of the super, super low stuff. And just a little, the usual suspects up here. And this is doing a little bit of level boosting. And then the final stage is this guy, which I love. Love, love, love this plugin. I love the UAD version of it. I love the original Sonics version of it as well. And I love the enhance knob. It just brings out more harmonics. It just sounds fatter. And then, like that wasn't enough, then I take the entire mix and I send it to, wait for it, a parallel compressor, and blend that into taste. And sometimes I rise that up in the hooks, bring it back down. Sometimes I don't use it at all. Sometimes I use a lot of it because it just does this crazy thing. You know, speakers are so weird, right? Like, if you hear a vocal and it's not compressed and it's doing this, where if it gets loud, it's like really loud and it's quiet. Where did it go? When you see me, it's not weird, but if you're just listening to it, it sounds amateurish. It doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like the way our ears perceive a record to sound, whatever that means. So all of these bizarre tricks, they're not tricks, they're just ways to like kind of frame this very unnatural picture in a way that hopefully makes it feel natural. It's like it's all these weird kind of hoops I have to jump through just to make the speakers, again, the speakers really just don't care. They don't give a shit what we play through them. But that's so helpful. I often say that the speakers produce the record in a way. People will talk a lot about, oh, we should do this, we should try this, we shouldn't do this. I don't want to sound like that band. I really want to sound like that band. Just try it. Just whatever it is, there should never be tambourine on this record. There has to be tambourine in there. Like, whatever it is, you know, try it. And everybody in the room, once you hear it through the speakers, will pretty much agree. You know, unless somebody's incredibly high or delusional or both. And there's so sort of ego attached to their idea that they can't get past what they're hearing. There are some people like that out there, but pretty much everyone will be like, that's great, or, And if it's, that means it didn't work. We got like 5 minutes left. Is there any more questions? Can we get the mic to him? I just want to clarify that the reason I showed the mix bus is because that's really a huge part of the vocal sound. You know, there's a world of mixers out there. A lot of them are members of Mix with the Masters and friends of mine who I'm a fan of. But they will say if you put a lot of stuff on the mix bus, that's a rookie mistake. And these are people that have amazing careers and make records I love. But I just put a ton of stuff on the mix bus. It just sounds better to me. There's a producer named Daniel Launay, who I'm very influenced by. I'm Canadian, he's Canadian. He's like a hero of mine. Very versatile career, worked with all kinds of people, just a lovely music maker, amazing record maker. And he said in an interview that I read that he really thinks an equalizer a lot more, it sounds better when you feed many sources into it at once, rather than EQing one thing at a time. He's like, it sounds better, it just helps me, it sounds like a better record. And that I don't know, that one sentence blurb in an interview really influenced me, and I like sending a lot of stuff through really kind of incredible pieces of gear, and I'll stop talking.
Quick question to follow up on the rear bus compression. How do you, when you're doing it post limiters, how do you keep the master bus from clipping if you're adding that to the limited mix?
My brain is wired to be additive, not subtractive, so I'm constantly fighting that. I'm constantly pulling things down.
Because I usually do it before and I feed the mix bus and a rear bus into the mix, but you're doing it after. I'm just wondering how you keep.
You know why you do that? Because it's a better idea.
Because
it makes more sense.
To tell you the truth, I saw Andy Sheps talk about it last year, so I just.
Yeah, Andrew is the most organized brain I've ever met with this stuff, and I wish I was even 25% of the way there. I'm just not. I'm like really naturally disorganized, and I just kind of go for things when they sound great. So yeah, I'm adding level beyond what on paper looks like, well, that is the final stage, but it's not. And I'm sure there's a more organized way to do it, but I'm not doing it. So I have to pull the mix bus down, or I'll pull down the Oxford limiter at the end of it, just like back that off a little bit so that I still have the vibe that I want.
So you just kind of hand tailor it so that you don't have any overs?
I mean, I hear it when it's getting crunchy, because digital is so, talk about speakers being unforgiving. Digital is like the supreme unforgiver. So you have to really watch gain staging, all of that stuff. Yeah, I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but I just use my ears. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Yeah, can you talk about the drums a little bit? Is it real kick drum, or is it?
It's every drummer in the world and every programmer in the world. There's so much going on. It's nuts. Most of it wound up. There's an amazing drummer named Chuck Haynes, Charles Haynes from Boston. He has played with Jay-Z, Kanye. He's done a lot of stuff. And I kept soloing. He's drumming on a lot of these songs, and these were tracks that were recorded before I came onto the project, and I kept soloing the drums. I'm a drummer who's played on hundreds of records, and I would solo the drums and just say, who is this? Who is this? And the answer was always the same guy. It was always Charles Haynes. And I wrote him, like, can I get his email address? You know, at some point I'm going to meet him. But that guy is one of the best drummers I've ever heard in my life, and he's drumming all over this. So there's a lot of him, and there's a lot of drums that I added as well. Some of it's live, some of it's just some of my favorite samples that I just placed by hand and created a beat from. Some of it is original programming from the very first demo, which just sounded right to me, and it sounded better than the more professional people that had been hired later with bigger careers. Like they got it right the first time. That often happens, I find, with demos. You know, there's like recording, and then there's re-recording. It's like there's creating, and then you're recreating. It's a different muscle that comes from a different place. And even though things might sound a little demo-y, and maybe they weren't done on like the best gear in the best room, it doesn't matter. It's like the vibe is the most important thing. The vibe is the thing that people are going to feel, that I'm going to feel. So I kept, as I said earlier, I kept plugging into that original demo vibe and trying to make that feel like a finished sort of world-class record that could kind of stand up and compete with anything. A lot of the drums, I think, are from the original just demo that was done in someone's bedroom.
Thanks.
We got time for one more question, or should we pull the plug? One more. Okay, one more.
Hello. How did you go about mixing the live drums and the electronic samples? And if you faced any problems, what were the problems? That makes sense.
You know, with Charles drumming, there were no problems. Like,
wow.
The thing is often, right, with live drums against something that's super quantized or, rigidly, like, on a grid, flams, right? Especially with the kick drum. Kick drum's not lining up. I think I did a little bit of beat detection on the live drums. If it was ever problematic, it often wasn't. I know if I'm drumming on it and I'm doing live drums to a program thing, I definitely don't want to hear any flams at all. And then sometimes, just like anything, you can find this even with samples too. If you have two different kick drum samples, they can get phasey, and you actually wind up with a lot less bottom end than you had before because they're fighting each other, they're canceling each other out. So you have to address that and move it, nudge it a little bit so that the waveforms are happier, playing with each other, they're not fighting each other. That kind of stuff. His drums sounded really good. They were a little kind of pingy for me, like the toms were really high, like doop, 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 and I like more of I wanted to sound like a martial arts movie, like you're being kicked in the stomach or something. So I remember just adding a lot of kind of more thud to the live drums. I might even have pitched down some of the toms. I can't remember. But he just sounded great. I mean, I just got a good balance of the drums. I ran it all to a drum bus. And I don't think I did much processing to the sound of the drums, other than when I sent it to the final bus B, which is for drums and bass here. And there's a lot of processing happening there. You want to hear him?
Please, yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty fun listen.
Thank you.
He comes in and out. He's not playing from top to bottom, but where are we here? Here he is. I'll just play from here. We're not grouped. Hang on a sec. is such a badass drummer. And it looked like I was adding some things that I didn't have soloed originally. I'm not quite sure what this is. He had some more parallel compression stuff, that guy. That sounded like something else too. And then it all goes through, like I showed you earlier. Actually, I didn't show you this. So here's the drum bus. I'm out of time, I gotta stop, but quite a bit of 10K, right? Like a lot at the broadest bandwidth. A bunch of pretty low bottom end, 60 hertz. The PSP plugins are really fun. I love this one, Vintage Warmer 2. It's great. The mix is pretty high, 80%. This is a stunning EQ. Looks like I'm going for some real high 40 kilohertz. Are you kidding me? But actually, it sounds different, even though we can't officially hear it. And pulling down this guy, bass shift. Does a little scoop here, a little boost there. More of a gate. And then this. Adding a little bit of attack. This is a friend of drums. If you want your drums to be real punchy, the Transient Designer is the bomb. It's amazing. Nothing else does what it does. I gotta shut up. I gotta stop. Thank you very much.
You can stick around for our panel with producer Jackie King in a minute. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tony Maserati. It's not about making a great sounding kick drum, it's about making a great sounding song.
Every day of the week. It's like taking the listener's hand and say, hey, listen to this idea, listen to that idea.
This is Andy Wallace here. For the short reverb, I'm using a Lexicon PCM 60.
This is Ed Kramer. Tape has a unique